Today we are doing Unit 2B, Mission 2. It says I can add and subtract fractions with non-common denominators. So that means today our bottom number is going to be different. In order to add our two fractions together, we need to make this fraction, or the denominator, the same. Have the same number on the bottom. So we're going to estimate, and we're going to use our number line here, and we're going to convert so that our denominators are the same. So right now, if we just looked at the fraction 1/3, that would be about this portion of our circle. Then if we had 1/12 more, well, I've already taken up about that much of our circle, so 1/12 more would get me about that far, which if you think about it is almost half of our circle. This piece that we colored in up there, plus our 1/12 more, it's not quite to a half, it's maybe a little bit less. So thinking on our number line, it would be a little bit less than a half. So if we converted these to have the same denominator, we can find an equivalent fraction to, for example, 1/3. If I take a third and I multiply by the same number on the top and the bottom to find an equivalent fraction, what could I multiply by so that I get a denominator of 12? Well, on the bottom we already have 3, and we know 3 times 4 is 12. So if we find an equivalent fraction by multiplying by 4, 1 times 4 is 4, 3 times 4 is 12. So now instead of 1/3, we can write 4/12 plus 1/12. So really 4 plus 1 is just 5, so our fraction becomes 5/12, which is almost like we said, almost a half, because 6/12 would be 1/2. Let's take a look at our next fraction. We have first 3/4. So on our circle we have 1, 2, 3 of the 4 colored in. And we're taking away 1/8. So we had about that much of our circle colored in. And if we take away 1/8 of it, we're still a little bit more than half, between a half and 3/4, which would be somewhere about there, because half would be about that of our circle, and we're just a little bit more. If we look at it in the actual number form, we don't have a common denominator, but we can make a common denominator by finding an equivalent fraction. I always like to look at the one with the smaller denominator, because you can always multiply to make it bigger to get to the other denominator that is larger. So if we have a 4 for our denominator, to get to 8, we can just multiply by 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 4 times 2 is 8. So now we have the same denominator. Instead of 3/4, we're going to write 6/8, because those are equivalent fractions. It's really the same portion of the fraction circle colored in. So 6/8 minus 1/8 would give us 5/8. Let's look at our next page. We have a word problem to begin with. It says Mario ran 1 1/4 of a mile and then rested for a few minutes. He then ran 3/8 of a mile more. How far did he run altogether? So altogether meaning adding up both pieces. So we had 1 1/4 plus 3/8. Well, we already know we have one whole, and then we're just combining our two fractions, 1/4 and 3/8. But they do not have a common denominator, so we can't just add them together. They're not the same size piece. So 1/4, if we multiply that by 2, that will give us a common denominator of 8. So 2 over 8. So we really have 2/8 plus our 3/8, which will give us 1 whole, and 2 plus 3 is 5, so it would be 5/8. 1 5/8 of a mile. So 1 mile and 5/8 more. Next we are subtracting, but we don't have a common denominator. If I look at this smaller number, I can't multiply 3 by anything to get to 4, and I can't multiply 4 by anything to get to 3. So what number do both 4 and 3 multiply into? Well, if you just multiply them by each other, they both multiply into 12. So I would have to multiply this fraction, 2/3, by 4 to get a denominator of 12. That would give us 4 times 2 is 8/12. And our second number, in order to get this to be a denominator of 12, we'd have to multiply this one by 3. So we'd have 3/12. So now that we have the same denominator, 8/12 and 3/12, we can subtract, like it says. 8/12 minus 3/12. We're just subtracting our numerator. 8 minus 3 is 5. So we have 5/12 for our answer. Let's try another. We have different denominators. We need to think what multiplies into both, what do 5 and 2 both multiply into? If we can't think of anything, just multiply by each other. 5 times 2 is 10. So for this one, in order to get a denominator of 10, we'd have to multiply by 2. That will give us 6/10. There's our first fraction that we need. And this fraction we need to multiply by, to get a denominator of 10. Multiply by 5. 2 times 5 would give us 10. So we'd have 5/10. There's our second fraction. And we are subtracting them. So 6/10 minus 5/10. Just subtracting our numerator. 6 minus 5 is 1. So our answer would be 1/10. Alright, next one like this, we have mixed numbers. We have whole numbers out front, so we can subtract those first. 8 minus 6 gives us 2. But we can't subtract our second piece because we have uncommon denominators. And we need a common denominator. So we can think, what do both 6 and 4 multiply into? Or if you can't think of anything, multiply by each other. I know 6 times 4 is 24, but there's actually a smaller number that 6 and 4 both multiply into. That number would be 12. 5, 6, I just need to multiply by 2 to get to 12. So that would be 10/12. And the other fraction, 3/4, 4 times 3 would get us to 12. That would give us 9/12. So if we look at both of our fractions, now we have 10/12 and 9/12, and we are subtracting them. 10 minus 9 is just 1, so we have 1/12 left over. So our answer is 2 and 1/12. We subtracted our whole numbers to get the 2, and subtracted our fractions to get the 1/12, sorry. Alright, next we have a couple word problems. It says 5/12 of the whole class finished the spelling test and went to the playground. 1/4 of the whole class finished soon after and joined the others on the playground. What fraction of the class is now on the playground? So that's our first question. And then our second question, what fraction of the class is left inside? So we need to really just add these fractions together. 5/12 plus 1/4. But we can't combine them because we have different denominators. So we need to make a common denominator. Well, 12 is a pretty big number, and 4, if we find a common denominator by multiplying by 3, 4 times 3 gives us 12. So we really have 5/12 plus 3/12. So 5 plus 3 is 8. 8/12. We're not adding the denominators because we're not changing the size piece. We have 5/12 of the class outside and 3/12 also joining them. Total of 8/12 would be outside. So what portion was left inside? How many more pieces would we need to get to one whole, or 12/12? So the whole class would be 12 out of 12, so 8 plus 4 more pieces would make a whole. If there's 8/12 outside and 4/12 inside, that would be the whole class. Now we could have simplified these as well. These are both even numbers. They both go into 4. So if we simplify, 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So 2/3 are outside, and same thing here. We could have divided by 4 to give us 1 out of 3, 1/3 inside. So these would be our two answers simplified. All right, next we have Joanna. She spent 2/9 of her allowance, I know that one's hard to see, 2/9 of her allowance at the movie, and 1/9 of her allowance on a new shirt. Yours looks a little bit better. 1/9 on a new shirt. She spent 1/9 of her allowance on candy. What fraction of her allowance did she spend in all, or all together, meaning adding them all up? These ones already have common denominators, so we can just add all of our numbers on the top. Oops. So we have 2 plus 1 plus 1. 2 plus 1 is 3, plus 1 more is 4. So she's spent 4/9 of her allowance altogether. Next, we have two expressions that have uncommon denominators. We need a common denominator in order to add together. 3 does not go into 7, so what do 7 and 3 both multiply to go into? Well, easy way here is just to multiply them by each other to get 7 times 3 is 21. So both of our denominators will be a 21. I would multiply this fraction by 3. So -4 times 3 is -12. 7 times 3 is 21. Plus, to get this denominator of 21, we need to multiply by 7. 2 times 7 is 14. 3 times 7 again is 21. And we're just adding these two fractions up. However, one of our numbers is negative. Negative and a positive, we have more positives than negatives, so we're really subtracting. Remember, different signs subtract. 14 minus 12 would give us 2. 2 pieces out of 21, or 2 21sts. Next, we have 3 fractions in a row. We need a common denominator. We have 6, 8, and 24. If you have a bigger number, see if the two smaller numbers could multiply into this big number so that you don't need to think of a number larger than 24. Do 8 and 6 go into 24? Well, I know 6 times 4 is 24, so we can multiply the first fraction by 4 to give us a denominator of 24. And then 8 times 3 will also give us 24. So we can multiply those fractions. -1 times 4 is -4. Then as a subtraction, 3 times 3 is 9. And then the last one is just 7. We're not multiplying anything. Now they all have common denominators, so we're really only looking at our numbers on the top. So we really have -4 minus 9 plus 7. If we take it one piece at a time, -4 minus 9, well, they're all negatives here. We're owing $4 and now 9 more. That's a total of -13. And then we have to add 7 24ths. So again, you're just looking at the top because they're the same size piece. -13 plus 7, well, there's more negatives. Different signs subtract. 13 take away 7 would give us 6. So we have 6 24ths. This is a nice answer. However, we can simplify because they're both multiples of 6. So if we simplify by dividing by 6, that will give us an answer of -1 over, well, 6 goes into 24 4 times. 6 times 4 is 24. So the best answer simplified would be -1/4. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, your key to this assignment is finding